If you have your Bibles, we invite you to turn to the 39th chapter of Genesis. The 39th chapter of Genesis. We are continuing in our series in Joseph and God's molding process. And we have seen our friend Joseph has been through a lot. He's been was captured by his brothers, sold into slavery, and he wound up in prison. You're going to see today, I believe he was released into Potiphar's house, and he's going to be back in prison for standing for what is right. You know, we stand for God and stand for right a lot of times, and we still get in trouble. Genesis 39, 6 through 12. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not all he had save in the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. And there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth. Then she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came unto me to mock thee. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, and that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. If you will, let us stand. Joseph's temptation reminds us of ourselves. There's not a soul in this church today that's not been tempted. Even our Lord in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights was tempted. The only difference between him and us is that he withstood the temptation for 40 days and 40 nights without sin. Oftentimes, just to be perfectly frank, we blow it. I've blown it many times. I've given in to it. But here we see this morning, the inspired writer has given us this account. We've seen many great principles of the life of Joseph. How in adversity God would prepare him and God would use him. He would become the prime minister of Egypt. He would become the second most powerful man in the world. He would be the administrator. There was a great famine in the world at that time, in the land. And he would all of the grain and everything. But we see that here Potiphar had given, and Potiphar was an official there in the Egyptian government. He had given young Joseph complete run of the house and his affairs. So we see here God working through Joseph. We see the integrity and the character there of Joseph. Potiphar had complete trust in this young man. He put him over his whole affairs. As we have seen, and as we have read many places there in these chapters of Genesis, we see that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And here we find that he's with Joseph again. Always remember, child of God, this morning, God is with you. You know, we pray for God to be with us. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've prayed it many a time. But we really don't need to pray that. If we're saved this morning, if we're right with God, God's with us. His Holy Spirit dwells within each one of us this morning. So he's with us. But he was especially here with this young man, Joseph. We see the hand of God in the molding and the forming process there. He is preparing Joseph for greater things. Now, while Joseph was busy with his duties, Mrs. Potiphar was also busy. And she was busy scheming. Joseph was a handsome, young, 19 or 20-year-old man. And evidently she was a rather beautiful lady herself, married to an older man. We believe Potiphar was an older man who had married a younger lady, which was common in that day. Well, we see that lust took over in Mrs. Potiphar's life. She saw this young man, and by now she is going to have, no matter what, she was going to have Joseph all to herself. She sees Joseph and desires him and seeks to entice him. Now, we're not given Mrs. Potiphar's name. She remains nameless. So what we're going to call her this morning is Desire. We're going to call her Mrs. Desire. Mrs. Desire Potter, if you please. But by closely examining Joseph's encounter with Desire, we can learn how to overcome the sin which so easily besets. There in Hebrews 12:1. And we all have those sins. We all have those weaknesses. We all have those Achilles heels. There ain't one of us in this house this morning that's perfect. I've never met a perfect Christian. I've met them near perfect, but I have never met a Christian this morning without sin. We all fail. We all have shortcomings. We all have these sins. We all battle with the flesh. Paul said, what did the great man, what did St. Paul said? He said, the things that I want to do, you know, I don't do it. The very things that I don't want to do, I wind up doing. Now that's a mountain translation there. You can look it up in the King James later. But anyway, you know, these desires, these sins so easily beset us. Now, Paul tells us over in 1 Corinthians 10:13, 1 Corinthians 10:13, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will, with the temptation, also make a way to escape that ye might be able to bear. It's not a sin to be tempted. Not a sin whatsoever. Jesus Christ himself was tempted He was the very Son of God, the very incarnation of God. He was tempted, yet without sin. Now, it's been speculated a lot. Could Christ have given in to temptation? Could Christ have blown it? I'm not going to give you an answer to that question. I'll say this: he had the power of God working through him in such a way that he didn't give in to temptation. He was very much in the flesh, though. But he certainly had God there with him. Not a sin to be tempted. Sin comes when we give in to it. Now, we see something, and the way it is, we see something that we want, or we see someone we may want. And they're probably a good-looking woman or a handsome young man. And, this is how people get into a lot of trouble. Now, there's not anything wrong. Some of that's natural. But I've always heard it say the second look's what gets you in trouble. But that's something all of us have to be careful with. We see there, back in 39:7, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. We see there longing eyes. We see there the eyes of desire. Now, James 1:14 and 15, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So when we see that thing, or whatever causes that lustful thought to enter in, we cultivate it. And man, we just, just like Eve when she saw that juicy, nice apple there on and we'll call it an apple. We don't know what fruit it is. But imagine a nice, juicy, red, luscious apple. And God said, no, you can't have that. You can't have the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The devil was right there. He said, come on now, God said, I'm going to do nothing, but Eve said, God said that if we ate of that fruit, that we would die. Don't pay any attention. There to him, God's just telling you that because he don't want you to have a good time. That's how it works. That's how temptation works. We see the thing or the thought or whatever enters our mind. And by then we got to have it. We got to have it. But this brings about a lot of trouble. I'm sure if you were to ask a lot of people today, especially married people who cheated on their spouse, you would say, or they would say, man, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had remained faithful to my spouse. That longing, that seemingly innocent thing that we call innocent can lead to a lot of trouble. I've seen it. I've seen it in my own family. I've seen where sin has great costs. Great costs. Many a man of God, many a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ has gotten into all sorts of trouble, and they've had to get out of the ministry because of sin, adultery, and so on and so forth. We see their blind infatuation there. Notice, if you will, verse 6. Joseph was a goodly person, well favored there. Handsome in form and appearance. Now, going back there to what we said about Eve there in Genesis 3:6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the the islands. And a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. The old saying is, she ate them out of house and home. They were banished there from Eden. We see rationalization there, 39:10. And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, or to be with her. Day by day, there in the verse 10. Not just a one-time deal, man. This was day after day that Mrs. Potiphar, made those sexual advances toward Joseph. I don't know how long of a period of time it was. It could have been a week. It could have been a month. But man, she just didn't give up. And we could say, poor old Joseph, man, he wanted to do what was right, and he wanted to be obedient to God first and foremost, and he wanted to be obedient there to Potiphar, and he knew that if he gave in to this temptation, that he would be sinning most importantly against the holy God, and that he would get in trouble there with his boss. But it was almost constant. She dropped the bait day after day. And each day Joseph, with the help of God, only by the grace of God, did he not take the bait. Joseph had rebuffed her time and time again, refusing to yield to her advances. Now we see the opportunity, and I believe this was a setup. Notice, if you will, verse 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. There was none of the men of the house there within. The people there, probably the other servants there, were gone. And finally she set a trap. She says, oh buddy, if you ain't going to give in to me, then I'm going to get you in trouble. So she set a trap for him. Now, Joseph, he came in. Maybe, as we say here in the mountain, to come in to get him a little dinner or whatever. But notice the house was quiet. He noticed that everyone was gone. He probably thought that a little strange. No servants about. Where were they? Perhaps Mrs. Potiphar had sent them on errands to get them out of the road. Well, whatever the reason, she was alone in the house. And again, she made her move. Only this time, she wasn't going to take no for an answer. She went beyond verbal advances and physically grabbed hold of Joseph. And she held on so tightly there to his garment that when he jerked away and dashed into the stream, he left his outer robe in her hands. We see decision there. She caught him there. He left at 39:12. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and got him out. He ran away. How do you deal with temptation? How do you deal with the devil? Can't fight him. Devil, we're no match for the devil. Now, God is a match for the devil. We're no match. We're told to resist the devil and flee. Don't play around with temptation. Don't play around with that thing that'll get you in trouble. Don't play around, as it were, with a rattlesnake on the shelf. Get out, leave, flee. And that's exactly what Joseph did. He fled. This was a setup. He would get into trouble. Now, there's some proven principles for facing temptation. Now, we're going to have it. We're going to be tested and tried and tempted. Every one of us. No doubt about it. But there's some things we can do. And a lot of Christians don't live a victorious Christian life. They get into all sorts of trouble. That's why we see today so many marriages failing. And like I said earlier, so many of the men of God just, having to get out of the ministry. But here are some principles that we can follow. We need to, first of all, decide early to walk with God. We see there in Genesis 39:9, there is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Now, old Joseph there, he was a good-looking man. And he could have given in to this temptation. Probably could have had any woman there in the land that he wanted. And God would give him the right woman later on. But anyway, he could have given him. But he didn't. Why didn't he? Because he made a decision that he wasn't going to sin against God. We've got to make that decision, folks. That's got to be first and foremost. That's got to be the foundation. You've just got to say, I'm not going to allow this to mess up my relationship with God. You've got to go with that resolve, because if you don't, you're going to get in trouble. You may get in trouble anyway, I don't know. But you certainly better, and me certainly better, every one of us, determine and purpose in our heart we are not going to sin against God. We're just not going to do it. Now, we look over probably 1,000 or so years later at Daniel. Daniel 1:8. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel was a man here, like Joseph. He was taken here into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and he had a pretty good position. And a young man away from home, a young man away from his people, a young man away from the customs of his religion, he very easily could have given in to sin. But he didn't. Now what did he do? He purposed in his heart he would not defile himself. The Jews had very strict dietary laws, and their religion was very strict. And he was going to keep it. Even though he was a young man there in the foreign land in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, he was not going to defile himself with a portion of the king's meat and with the wine which he drank. He wasn't going to defile himself. Now there, as we read in Genesis 39 verse 9, that we see that Joseph set clear, firm limitations for himself. And he practiced self-denial. He did not heed her. He could have had her. He could have had any woman that he wanted to. He knew that that was not God's way. He knew that that was not God's will. And he loved God and had such a relationship with him, and that's important, by the way, the relationship, that he set the resolve that he would not sin here against God. Now, Paul, in 1 Corinthians 9:27, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. And that is a great lesson to we as preachers, to practice what we preach, and to. Folks, we're not going to be perfect. I'm not a perfect preacher. I'm not a perfect man. But in as much as we can with God's help, we've, got to try to do the right thing. Joseph here, now he would not put himself into a compromising situation, not to be with them. Especially a lot of preachers, a lot of men of God out there in counseling situations. They should have someone in there with them. They should never do it alone. That has got broken up so many marriages. But he exercised strong determination there in the 12th verse. And she called him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and God did out. He left, he ran, he fled. And he knew trouble was coming. And he skedaddled on out of there. He left. He wasn't going to defile himself. He wasn't going to sin against God. And he left in a hurry. He got out there. James 4 said, Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Now we can't fight the devil, but we can resist him. We go back to the example there of Christ in the wilderness. How did he resist the devil? Well, he quoted Scripture. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by the word of God. Satan, offered him everything, all the kingdoms of the world, if what? He would bow down and worship him. He said, no. No. Jesus knew his mission. Jesus knew that he couldn't give in to Satan, or everything would be at a loss according to the plan of God. Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Joseph overcame this field test of spiritual development. And we're going to face this. We all face it. And the question is, will we give in? We all have to make that decision. Every one of us have the choice whether to sin or not. And to do the right thing will be not to sin. F.B. Meyer said, days of outward prosperity are those of which we are most keenly tempted. You go back, for example, King David, there. He didn't go out with his men in the battle for whatever reason. He didn't feel the need to go out. So he was up there in his palatial palace. And you know the story, how he saw Bathsheba there bathing. Man, he got to looking and man, I got to have Bathsheba. And he sent for her. You know that they had relations. And they birthed a son, Solomon. Old David suffered for that. He was a man after God's own heart. He suffered greatly. Nothing would ever be the same in the house of David ever again. His whole family is messed up. His son Absalom, would lead a resistance against his own father. I believe that David would lose a baby. It cost him dearly. And there in the 51st Psalm, let's just turn over there for just a minute. The 51st Psalm. This is one here written by David. I love the Psalms. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according unto the multitude of thy tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee, thee only, have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear what thou judgest. And it goes on there. See, a broken man. I believe this was after Nathan the prophet. And one sin led to other sins. He had adultery, practiced adultery with another man's wife, Uriah. One of his, I guess, captain of the guard there. And then he would, because he didn't want this found out, he had Uriah killed in battle. I believe Nathan came to him and gave him the parable there about the king stealing the poor man's sheep and lambs. David, who was red-headed and fiery in temper, said, "Who is this man? I'll kill him." And Nathan pointed the finger and said, "Thou art the man." That was a big risk there to Nathan. You know, a king could have you just like that. He said, "Thou art the man." And from then on, we see a broken David, man after God's own heart. But he was broken. Never would be the same in the house of David. Yes, God restored him. God restored the relationship. God will do that. But there's always consequences. Consequences are not always erased. I believe I heard several years ago, we used to listen to Jimmy Swaggart. Boy, he could sing, play that piano. I believe he and Mickey Kelly and Jerry Lee Lewis all trained on that one piano. I like that way he could play that piano. And we used to watch him. Liked him pretty good till one day he said, essentially, if you don't speak in tongues, you ain't saved. That's what he essentially said, and I said no more of that. But anyway, he gave an illustration one time. A good friend of his, I can't remember who it was, who was an alcoholic. You know, came to the Lord and he gave it up. Gave up drinking. Lord forgave him and saved him and all of that. But he wound up with cirrhosis of the liver. And he told Jimmy one day, he said, "Jimmy," says, "I have no doubt that God saved my soul, but he ain't saved my liver." The physical consequences there of sin this man had to endure. God will forgive us, sure. But there's consequences that probably more than likely we'll have to bear. But F.B. Meyer goes on to say, "The most venomous serpents calleth the down heat of tropical forests. When temptation and opportunity meet, our case is hard indeed. At such times only God's grace can hold us back. As temptation presents itself again and again, it gives us opportunities of continued growth and strength in grace." Joseph had probably wrought out his noble answer in his own secret heart, and had lived by it weeks before he flashed it forth. In the critical hour, the mouth blurts out what the heart has been meditating. They who can rule themselves will be presently trusted to rule others. So this morning, this is something common to us all, temptation. And we find how Joseph dealt with it.